Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Lee's hands trembled as he stood over Luna, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a storm cloud that refused to break. The world around them was silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves in the forest clearing where they stood. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting jagged shadows across Luna's pale face, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resignation. Lee's fingers tightened around the blade, its cold steel biting into his palm, grounding him in the moment he wished he could escape. This was not how it was supposed to end. Not for her. Not for them. The chain of troubles had begun months ago, a cascade of events that spiraled beyond anyone's control. It started with a simple misunderstanding, a whispered rumor in their small village that grew into a venomous truth. Luna, with her sharp wit and unyielding spirit, had always been a target for envy. Her beauty was not just in her features, but in the way she carried herself, unapologetic, fierce, and free. She was the flame that drew moths, and Lee had been one of them, captivated from the moment they met as children, playing in the fields under the endless summer sky. But the village was a crucible, and envy turned to suspicion. Whispers of Luna's alleged dealings with forbidden knowledge, old texts, strange symbols, and whispered chants spread like wildfire. The elders called it witchcraft, a betrayal of their traditions. Lee, who had grown up by her side, who knew her heart better than anyone, refused to believe it. He defended her, his voice rising in the council meetings, his fists clenched as he faced down the accusing glares. But the more he fought for her, the more the village turned against them both. Finn, Lee's closest friend, had tried to mediate. Finn, with his easy smile and boundless optimism, believed in the goodness of people. He thought he could talk sense into the elders, convince them that Luna was no threat. But Finn's efforts only deepened the rift. The village split into factions, those who believed Luna was a danger, and those who saw her as a scapegoat for their fears. Lee and Finn stood by her, but the pressure was relentless. The accusations grew darker, the threats more explicit. Luna's home was vandalized, her books burned, her name cursed in the streets. Luna, for her part, remained defiant. She refused to flee, to give in to the mob's demands. "If I run," she told Lee one night, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes, "they'll never stop. They'll hunt me, and they'll hunt anyone who ever loved me." Lee wanted to argue, to beg her to leave, but he saw the fire in her gaze and knew she would not bend. He loved her for that, even as it tore him apart. The tipping point came when the village elders issued an ultimatum. Luna would face trial, a formality that everyone knew would end in her death. The evidence was fabricated, the witnesses coerced, but the outcome was inevitable. Lee and Finn devised a desperate plan to spirit her away under the cover of night, to take her to a distant town where she could start anew. They gathered supplies, mapped routes, and waited for the right moment. But betrayal came from within. Finn, in his naivety, had confided in someone he thought was a friend. The plan was exposed, and the village militia descended on the forest where Luna was hiding. Lee and Finn fought to protect her, their makeshift weapons no match for the mob's numbers. Blood was spilled, and in the chaos, Luna was captured. Finn was beaten, left bruised and broken, his spirit shattered as he watched them drag her away. Lee followed, tracking the militia to the clearing where they intended to carry out their so-called justice. He pleaded with them, his voice raw with desperation, but the elders were unmoved. They handed him the blade, their eyes cold and unyielding. "Prove your loyalty," they said. "End this, or you'll share her fate." The weight of their words crushed him, but the sight of Luna, bound and kneeling, her gaze locked on his, broke something deeper. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She only looked at him, her eyes steady, as if she understood the choice he faced. "Lee," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. "Don't let them win." He didn't want to do it. Every fiber of his being screamed against it. But the militia closed in, their weapons glinting in the moonlight, their threats ringing in his ears. If he refused, they would both die, and Finn, already battered, would be next. Lee's hands shook as he raised the blade, his vision blurring with tears. Luna's face was calm, almost serene, as if she had already accepted her fate. The act was swift, but it felt like an eternity. The blade met flesh, and Luna's body slumped to the ground. The crowd was silent, their bloodlust sated, but Lee felt nothing but a hollow ache. He dropped the blade, his hands stained with her blood, and staggered back, his mind reeling. The elders nodded, their approval meaningless. They dispersed, leaving Lee alone with Luna's lifeless form. Finn found him hours later, still kneeling beside her, his face buried in his hands. Finn's own pain was etched into every line of his body, his bruised face, his trembling shoulders. He had failed to save her, just as Lee had. They were bound by their grief, their guilt, their love for the woman who had been their light. Finn reached for Lee, but Lee pulled away, unable to bear the touch of another human being, not when his hands still carried the weight of what he had done. The days that followed were a blur. The village returned to its routines, as if Luna had never existed. Her name was erased, her memory buried beneath layers of fear and shame. Lee and Finn drifted apart, their friendship fractured by the unspoken blame they each carried. Finn threw himself into work, trying to drown his pain in labor, but his eyes were hollow, his smile gone. Lee, meanwhile, withdrew entirely. He left the village, unable to live among the people who had forced his hand. He wandered, a ghost among the living, haunted by the memory of Luna's final moments. In the years that followed, Lee became a wanderer, moving from town to town, never staying long enough to form connections. He carried Luna's memory like a wound that would never heal, her face etched into his dreams, her voice echoing in his moments of silence. He wondered if she had been right, if by killing her, he had let the village win. The chain of troubles had ended, but at what cost? The weight of her death was a burden he could never set down, a punishment he carried in his heart. Finn, too, was changed. He remained in the village, but he was no longer the man he had been. The optimism that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet resignation. He visited Luna's grave in secret, leaving flowers and whispering apologies to the wind. He blamed himself for the betrayal, for trusting the wrong person, for failing to protect her. His pain was a mirror to Lee's, but they could not share it. The distance between them was too great, the wounds too deep. The forest clearing where Luna died became a place of legend in the village. Some said it was cursed, that her spirit lingered, seeking justice. Others claimed it was a place of redemption, where the truth of her innocence would one day be revealed. Lee never returned to it, but he carried its image with him, a stark reminder of the moment his world had shattered. Finn, too, avoided it, unable to face the place where their lives had been irrevocably changed. The story of Lee, Luna, and Finn became a whispered tale, passed down in hushed tones by those who remembered. It was a story of love and loss, of loyalty and betrayal, of choices made in the heat of desperation. It was a story of a chain of troubles that ended not in triumph, but in tragedy. For Lee, the act of killing Luna was the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. For Finn, it was the loss of a friend and the shattering of his faith in the world. For Luna, it was the price of her defiance, paid in blood. And so, the three of them were bound forever by that night in the clearing, Lee with his guilt, Finn with his pain, and Luna with her absence. The chain of troubles had ended, but its echoes lingered, a reminder that some wounds never heal and some stories never find a happy ending. The night was heavy with silence, and the forest carried a stillness that felt like it had been carved into the earth itself. Lee stood alone among the trees, the sound of his breathing almost too loud for him to bear. His hands trembled, though he tried to will them still, tried to command his body to obey his heart. But his heart was shattering, piece by piece, under the weight of what he had done. Luna's body lay motionless at his feet, her face pale, her eyes closed forever. He had killed her with his own hands, and though he told himself that it had ended the chain of troubles, that no more blood would spill, he could not quiet the thunder inside him. The moonlight touched her hair, making it glow faintly like silver strands scattered across the soil. He remembered the way that same hair once danced in the wind when she laughed, the way her eyes could outshine the stars when she smiled at him. Those memories were blades now, cutting deeper with every breath. He fell to his knees beside her, fingers brushing the back of her hand, still warm but fading. He wanted to whisper her name, to call her back, but he knew she would never answer. Far away, Finn cried. He did not know yet, not fully, but his soul felt the fracture, as if the world itself had torn apart. Finn had always been tied to both of them, bound by years of friendship, shared dreams, and broken promises. The pain came in waves, filling his chest until he could no longer breathe. Something inside him was gone, and when he found out what Lee had done, that absence would only deepen into a hollow that could never be filled again. Lee pressed his palms against the earth, staring at the ground as if it could swallow him whole. He whispered apologies, not once, but over and over, until his voice was raw. He told Luna he hadn't wanted it to come to this, that the shadows had left him no choice, that her power had become too dangerous to control. But even as he spoke the words, he hated himself for them. Were they reasons or excuses? Did it matter now? Luna was gone, and it was his hands that had delivered the final blow. The forest knew. The air had changed, and every tree seemed to bow under the sorrow that spread outward like ripples on a pond. The night creatures hid. The stars dimmed. Somewhere in the distance, water fell from a cliff into a river, its sound echoing like an endless lament. Lee raised his head to the sky, but he could not look at the stars without remembering how Luna had once pointed them out to him, naming constellations with a voice filled with wonder. Now, those same constellations seemed like cruel reminders of everything he had destroyed. Finn's footsteps eventually broke the silence. He came stumbling through the undergrowth, chest heaving, eyes wild. He had run all the way, his instincts guiding him to the scene before he had even been told. And when he arrived, when his eyes fell on Luna's still form and then rose to meet Lee's broken gaze, the world cracked open between them. Finn dropped to the ground, his hands trembling as they reached for Luna's face. He shook his head, whispering her name, begging her to wake. But her chest did not rise, and her lips remained still. His cries pierced the night, raw and jagged, echoing like a wound no sound could heal. He turned to Lee then, and what Finn saw was not an enemy, not yet. He saw a man undone, drenched in his own despair. Why? Finn's voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried more weight than any shout could. Why would you do this? Lee's throat closed. He tried to speak, but the words refused to come. His lips moved, but nothing could bridge the abyss between them. At last, with tears burning in his eyes, he whispered, "I thought I was saving us." Saving us? Finn's voice cracked, disbelief pouring from him. She was everything. She was the light we had left. Lee shook his head, his chest rising and falling as if he were drowning. The power inside her, it was consuming her. She was losing herself. If I hadn't, his voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. If I hadn't, the world would have suffered. She would have suffered. Finn's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to strike Lee, to tear him apart for daring to believe he had the right to decide Luna's fate. But when he looked at Lee again, all he saw was ruin. The man before him had not won anything. He had lost more than he could carry. Still, that did not bring Luna back, and it did not ease the agony twisting inside Finn's chest. The night stretched on. Neither of them moved. The cold seeped into their bones, yet the fire of grief burned hotter with every passing moment. They remembered together, though unspoken, the days when all three of them had walked this path side by side. They remembered laughter, dreams of peace, the way Luna would scold them both when they argued too long. Those memories clashed violently with the present, where she lay between them, silent forever. At dawn, the sky grew pale, and the world felt crueler for daring to continue. Lee stood, though his legs shook beneath him. He bent down and lifted Luna into his arms, her weight both unbearable and unbearably light. Finn followed, silent, his eyes hollow. They carried her together, not speaking, because no words could possibly exist for what had been broken. They buried her where the river bent toward the horizon, under a tree that she had once loved. She had sat beneath its branches often, humming songs that neither Lee nor Finn had ever known the words to, but which they could still hear in their minds. As the soil covered her, the sound of Finn's sobs filled the morning air. Lee's tears fell silently, soaking into the earth. When the grave was finished, the two men stood side by side, but a canyon yawned between them. Finn turned his head slightly, his voice low and shaking. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Lee did not ask him to. He nodded, his eyes locked on the grave. "I don't know if I can forgive myself." They lingered there, neither willing to leave, because leaving meant admitting that life would move on without her. The wind whispered through the tree branches, carrying fragments of memory, fragments of a world that had ended with Luna's last breath. Days turned into weeks, and the ache did not fade. Finn grew quiet, withdrawing from the world, unable to find meaning in anything he touched. He carried Luna's voice in his mind, but it was a ghost that haunted him, not a comfort. Lee wandered, restless, sleepless, reliving the moment again and again. His hands shook constantly, remembering the feel of her slipping away. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, and every time he woke, he wished he hadn't. The chain of troubles might have ended, but the chain of grief had only begun. Lee often returned to the grave, sitting by the river for hours, speaking softly into the wind. Sometimes Finn came too, though they rarely spoke to each other. They existed together in silence, their pain a mirror that reflected endlessly between them. There was no comfort, but there was a strange kind of understanding. Both had loved her. Both had lost her. And both would carry her absence forever. The seasons shifted. Leaves fell. Snow blanketed the world in white. Flowers bloomed again. But for Lee and Finn, time had fractured on the night Luna died, and no number of days could mend it. The world demanded they keep walking, yet every step was heavy, every breath lined with sorrow. Lee sometimes thought about the choice he made, wondering if there had been another path, another way he had not seen in the darkness. He thought about what Luna might have said if she had known his decision before it was carried out. He thought about Finn's eyes when he asked, why, and how he would hear that question until the end of his days. And Finn, in his quiet moments, thought about Luna's laughter, about the warmth of her hand in his, about the dreams they had shared. He thought about Lee, about the brotherhood they had once had, and about how grief had turned it to ash. His heart ached with longing for what had been and burned with anger for what was taken. Neither man found peace. Perhaps they never would. But beneath the tree by the river, where Luna rested, there remained a place where sorrow and memory met. There, they could sit together, broken though they were, bound not by forgiveness, but by the love of the one they had lost. And so the story of Luna did not end with her death. It lived in the silence of two men who had once called her family. It lived in their grief, in their shattered hearts, in the endless ache of what if. It lived in the way they carried her with them, always, even as the world demanded they move on. For some stories do not end. They simply echo forever.